And if this is your first time giving your mind a little love, I have a few goodies for you. First, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And second, sign up for the Morning Mind Love. Think of it like a weekday oracle from your highest self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, you'll get 2 gifts absolutely free: a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up. Welcome to Mind Love, episode 256. Today's episode is all about achieving non-judgment in 3 minutes a day.
It's important to discern between what is adaptive thinking, what is maladaptive thinking. We look at things around us, we automatically evaluate them, and we have become wired to judge everything as good or bad, or too much of this, not enough of that. So again, back to our thinking processes, when we think about the past, beyond that which is adaptive, we cast a negative hue, and we are very judgmental and most harshly of ourselves. And so the result of this way of thinking, these neural pathways that have become ingrained into our brains, is we generate a lot of shame and regret and low self-esteem when we think about the past judgmentally, in particular of ourselves.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
If this is your first time giving your mind a little love, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Mind love is a habit, and the more you give your mind that love and intention, the better you'll feel about yourself and your life. Plus, it's really a win-win because more subscribers means Mind Love attracts even more amazing guests to bring you their wisdom. So don't forget to subscribe. Today, I'd like to share a review from Lily252, who says, "It's like listening to your best friend. Melissa is not only knowledgeable, thorough, and interesting, she's real, honest, and open. Listening to her is like taking a walk with a friend and having one of those conversations that soothes your soul." Lily, I am so thankful for this review. Honestly, just knowing all of you out there in the community are getting something from Mind Love feels like I'm constantly surrounded by best friends. Just the energy of it. So thank you so much for taking the time and letting me know how you feel. Are you judgmental? Be honest. Because frankly, I'm pretty sure we all are, some more than others. What makes judgment more apparent in some people is whether or not they voice it. But there are plenty of us who have a ton of judgments constantly running through our minds, but just keep it to ourselves. And I think that's a step in the right direction. Why force other people into our view of how things should be or how they should be? Because the truth is, just because we think something is true doesn't mean it is. Just because we think this is how a person should act, or a good friend should act, or something is good or bad, or okay or not okay, doesn't mean we're right. I'm reminded of Byron Katie saying, "We're humans, we judge, that's just what we do." And it's true. It's the way we process our experiences. We reduce them to whatever we can understand most fully, and then we categorize them based on what we believe to be true. So all of our judgments are limited to our own experiences of the world. Personally, I think we're all wrong most of the time. And the reason is, the highest spiritual teachings say that everything is neutral. Everything just is. And I can already hear your egos arguing with that. And I know it's a very difficult concept to grasp, especially when we can see clearly what looks like wrongdoing or evil around us. But what I know for sure is that none of us sees the whole picture from our limited perspective. So as much as I don't and will probably never fully understand how an atrocious thing can be neutral, I just have to trust that there's something I don't see. So yes, on one hand, keeping your judgment to yourself is an evolved way of acting, kind of the basis of not bringing others down with you. But the problem is, our judgments don't just create suffering for other people. Our judgments create the most suffering within ourselves. Whether we're judging ourselves or our own past harshly, or we're holding people and the world around us to standards that they will never meet. Our judgments basically ensure that we will feel disappointed, that we'll feel disconnected, that we won't fully appreciate a moment or a person for who or what it is. And so the goal is total acceptance. And that doesn't mean condoning things that hurt people, but it does mean trusting the process. Trusting that all experiences are opportunities to learn through. Because it's our resistance to what is that creates our suffering. Always. There will still be pain, but the suffering is a choice. And I know, easier said than done. So how do we get there exactly? That's what we're talking about today. Our guest is Greg Hammer, MD. He's a professor at Stanford University's School of Medicine, pediatric intensive care physician, pediatric anesthesiologist, mindfulness expert, and the author of Gain Without Pain. He's also a health enthusiast and meditator, utilizing a non-duality and mindfulness-based approach to care. So 3 key things that we will learn are what judgments prevent us from seeing, how to move from judgment to acceptance in the moment, and a daily practice to rewire our brains to judge less overall. Hiring isn't just about finding someone willing to take the job. I need the right person with the right background who can actually move things forward, which is why I trust Indeed-sponsored jobs. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post even seen on other sites. Sponsored jobs boost your post for quality candidates so you can reach the exact people you want faster, and it makes a big difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs because you reach a bigger pool of quality candidates. If I needed to hire someone for the podcast, I wouldn't want people who just think editing sounds fun. I'd want someone who's edited conversational podcasts for years, gets my style, knows the software. And with Indeed-sponsored jobs, I'd get actual podcast editors who know what they're doing. Plus, you only pay for results. No monthly subscriptions, no long-term contracts. And in the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results now with Indeed-sponsored jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/mindlove. Just go to Indeed.com/mindlove right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/mindlove. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Do it the right way with Indeed. And now let's welcome Dr. Greg Hammer to the show.
Great to be with you.
So what is your background? What led you to writing a book full of tools, but one of them being non-judgment?
That is a good question. What led me to this place, I guess, is the sum of all of my prior experience, one moment at a time. But no, to be a little more serious, I grew up outside of Chicago. I was always interested in science. There are no scientists in my family other than my brother, who's a year older than I am, who's a very preeminent scientist now. But we were the first two. At university, decided to go to medical school just because the options were so broad. And while I was in medical school and deciding what I wanted to specialize in, I found that I had an affinity for people in pediatrics. I have no patience for egos, and I found the least ego in people practicing pediatrics and taking care of children. It wasn't really my love of children so much at that point, but it was really a kinship with the other healthcare providers. People didn't take themselves too seriously. They had a sense of humor, so it was right up my alley. And then I did a residency in pediatrics. I found that I loved making decisions on my feet, things coming hot and heavy where you have a problem you need to deal with right away, and you do something and you get some feedback immediately. And so that was anesthesiology and intensive care. And so I did another residency in anesthesiology and then fellowships in pediatric anesthesiology and intensive care. And then sort of fast forward, happy to share any more detail in between, but in answer to your question, I've been at Stanford since 1995, and Stanford convened a group called WellMD, which was also up my alley. I've been a long time fitness enthusiast. My undergraduate degree was in nutritional science. I've always been very interested in nutrition, both for myself and my patients, since I take care of sick, undernourished patients who are in a very catabolic state where their tissues tend to break down quickly in the intensive care unit. So I've always been into nutrition and exercise. I discovered that the third leg of the tripod that supports our physical well-being beside nutrition and exercise was sleep. So I got interested in sleep, and there's chapters in my book, my first book, on sleep, exercise, and nutrition as that tripod supporting our physical well-being. But the WellMD program at Stanford was convened 7 or 8 years ago, I would say, in response to the growing pandemic of burnout among physicians and other healthcare providers. So I got involved in that. And one thing led to another. I was asked to give a talk on burnout and wellness at a national meeting, and then another one and another one and another one. And pretty soon I was spending a lot of time talking about wellness, in addition to my research and my clinical interests. And I had a sabbatical, which we get periodically as professors at Stanford. And I decided, all the arrows were pointing in the direction of writing a book, because I'd been giving a lot of talks, and the idea really was to get the message out, to try to have a real impact on burnout in the healthcare sector. So it just seemed like a good idea to amplify that effort by writing a book. And I sat down, it just kind of flowed for the most part. I recruited a few of my esteemed colleagues to help write some of the chapters. And it turned out the book came out right after the pandemic was really on the upswing. And ever since then, I've been talking to people like you and others on television, radio, and podcast land who are not in the healthcare sector, because I think the book has broad appeal. It's really about practice that I embrace in my own life and the practice that I teach, which is called GAIN, or the GAIN method. And GAIN is an acronym for gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. Those, to me, are the 4 pillars of our emotional and spiritual well-being, as sleep, exercise, and nutrition are the 3 legs of the tripod for our physical well-being. So here we are, and I'm grateful to be sharing this hour with you.
The topic of judgment is interesting, especially in relation to the healthcare field, because there was a time in my life where I wouldn't be expecting a healthcare professional to be judging me. I have been lucky that I've always kind of been on the healthier side, which is funny to say. I've looked healthy from the outside. I've been very unhealthy on the inside at different points with different negative habits, bulimia, things like that, but I always hid them. And I didn't hear about it that much. I would hear it from friends or family that have dealt with obesity, that they've experienced judgment when they go to their doctor. But now, especially after the pandemic, the amount of people that I know that have experienced judgment in like a professional setting, whether it be their doctor or somewhere else, is pretty intense, because we all have these deeply ingrained beliefs about things. And then when it's the topic of conversation for everybody, it just reinforces our beliefs. And then we're around people who think like us, and we're looking at the people who othering the people who don't think like us. And so what are some of the problems that judgment creates? What are some of the problems that judgment creates?
Well, as I said, the N in GAIN is non-judgment. And the reason that we have to focus on that with the I in GAIN, which is intention, we have to intentionally focus on non-judgment. These 4 elements of GAIN are really interrelated. Our minds or our brains are wired in some ways that I think veil or interfere with our happiness. So, for example, one of the things at the top of the list is negativity. We all have a negativity bias. We tend to embrace negative things and forget about positive things. And we can talk about some examples of that I think are particularly poignant. Another property that our brains have, and they seem to have become hardwired in this way, and again, this is all of us. So I think it's kind of a relief for people to hear that they're not the only one who has the other way beside having a negativity bias, we're very distracted by the past and the future in ways that are maladaptive. This is how our brains have become wired. And I think I can explain it, at least hypothetically, from a evolutionary standpoint. But it's adaptive, for example, with regard to the past, to savor our good memories. It's adaptive to some degree, think of mistakes that we've made that are legitimate mistakes because we don't want to make them again. So if we just ignore things that haven't worked out well, we'll keep making the same mistakes. I think Einstein said something about that. So it's important to discern between what is adaptive thinking, what is maladaptive thinking. Beyond those two things, mostly when we think of the past, and especially in combination with our negativity bias, we tend to have a lot of negative thoughts. And this includes judgments. And that's really the third way our brains work, is we look at things around us, we automatically evaluate them, and we have become wired to judge everything as good or bad, or too much of this, not enough of that. So again, back to our thinking processes, when we think about the past, beyond that which is adaptive, we cast a negative hue, and we are very judgmental, and most harshly of ourselves. And so the result of this way of thinking, these neural pathways that have become ingrained into our brains, is we generate a lot of shame and regret and low self-esteem when we think about the past judgmentally, in particular of ourselves. With respect to the future, it's adaptive to plan to put bread on the table, and it's adaptive to look forward to wonderful memories, or rather wonderful events that will become memories with our loved ones. But beyond that, again, with our negativity bias, we tend to catastrophize when we think of the future. We think of the worst thing that might happen. And so we generate a lot of fear and anxiety. And this is just the way we think. So when it comes to judgment, with our negativity bias, we tend to be harsh judges. In other words, I think when we say judgmental, there's a sort of a pejorative, there's a negative implication that we're judging negatively. And we judge people negatively. With our negativity bias, we look for what's wrong in everything and we judge that. So that could be the way our car rides. Oh, it does this, it has that rattle, it has this, poor shock absorption, the steering is not good. Instead of marveling at what a miracle it is that we can actually be in a car and drive somewhere. So yes, we're very judgmental, and we use a lot of mental energy judging, and it is generally not very productive. You think about it. I mean, I think we have to, first of all, establish the difference between discerning and judging. So it's important to discern. We look at food, we need to discern whether it's healthy or something that would not be healthy for us. It doesn't mean we're judging the food. We're discerning between what is healthy and what may be not healthy. So it's important to discern. We look at other people, and we only have a limited amount of time in our lives. And so we discern, should I spend time with Melissa? Yeah, Melissa is really insightful, and we have good conversations. Should I get together with someone else who's selfish and extremely judgmental? No. So we do have to discern. We have to make a decision. With whom are we going to spend our time? That's not necessarily judging. So it's important, I think, to understand the difference. Judgments generally lead to really nothing productive, and they kind of drain our energy. And we can talk about the GAIN method, an exercise that we can do to become less judgmental. But, I think being non-judgmental is really important. Since you want a really long answer, or if you want a really long answer, there's a story that you may have heard, or a version of it, but the short version is a guy He's in New York. He's riding the subway. Subway train stops. This guy gets on, and he's got 5 kids with him. And the door closes, and the guy sits down. And the kids are all between the ages of 3 and 9, and they're kind of bouncing off the walls. And there's an older couple sitting across the aisle, and the couple is looking at the guy and his kids, and they're forming judgments about him because his kids are not really well controlled and, disciplined, and just sitting quietly in the chairs and kind of generating a little bit of noise, and, taking people's attention away because, they're running around or whatever. So the subway goes a couple stops, and then it stops, and the doors open, and the 5 kids and the guy get off. And as the gentleman is getting off the subway, he looks at the couple and he says, "We just came from my wife's funeral. I don't know what I'm going to do with these kids." And then the door closes and the subway takes off. And it just, the message is, I think, resonant, that here was this couple judging this guy, and look at what the guy's going through. Does he warrant their harsh judgment because of his kids? Of course not. I may walk into a child's room in the intensive care unit, and often I'll do a couple of breaths of gain practice before I go into the room, just to kind of bring myself into the present moment, into focus. And I walk in the room, and there's a child who's very sick, who's got respiratory failure, is on a ventilator, and I smell smoke on the mother's sweater. And you talk about people being judged by their physician or others in the healthcare system. So I could easily start to make judgments about this woman. She smokes cigarettes. Of course, her child is exposed to secondhand smoke. No wonder their asthma is really bad, and they ended up on a ventilator. And if I started to make any judgment when I smelled smoke on the woman's sweater, because I have my daily practice about non-judgment, a little light bulb goes off, and I immediately recognize that I'm starting to make negative judgments. And I kind of laugh at myself for doing that. And I drop the judgment. And, maybe it turns out the woman smoked, she quit 20 years ago, and now her child is doing poorly, and she bummed a cigarette from a guy outside in the courtyard and immediately put it out after one puff. Or maybe she was just standing next to somebody who was smoking outside. She doesn't smoke. It's just the smell got on her sweater. So like the guy on the subway, there are a lot of things that we judge people for that turn out to be very premature. And even if they're not, there's no benefit to doing so.
I have so much to say about that. First of all, since I've had a child and now I'm pregnant again, I am so much less judgmental of almost everybody. And I think it's because of of this stark just difference. Like I've always been a traveler, and I just was like a wild 20-year-old, and flew a lot, and I'd be next to a kid, and I'll be honest, I was the asshole rolling my eyes. I wouldn't say anything. I think there was a time that if I had like 3 glasses of wine on the plane, I'd like turn around like, why is your kid kicking my seat? I went on a flight over summer, and it was just me and my son. And I really tried to prep to make sure that I had like my ideal situation. I had a car seat on this, a travel stroller that could go in the overhead bin. Didn't think of the fact that the stroller couldn't actually travel through the aisle. And so then I had to have 2 men help me carry my baby and this stroller because I was also pregnant. He did fine for most of the time except for 1 hour. And that 1 hour scared the crap out of me. Like I had to pick him up, walk him down the aisle. He's kicking people in the head. I'm like, what are people thinking about me right now? Thankfully, most people were very kind. And the ones that were assholes tended to be the young ones, like late teens, early 20s. And I'm like, you just wait. But I've noticed that when I'm judging, it almost feels like I'm throwing daggers at the person. Like I need to teach this person a lesson with my judgment. But in reality, I'm the one, it's like the throwing hot coals, you're the one that gets burned type thing. Like I'm the one who's miserable about it. And now I have these little practices as well where somebody cuts me off on the highway and I'm like, nah, and I feel like I need to go do that back to them. And I just tell myself the same story every time. his wife's in the back about to deliver and he's got to get to the hospital. And then I'm like, yeah, go for it. Let me just pull over for you. Like whatever. But it's not even about, it's just about me. Like all of that tension is held within me and I'm the one who has to suffer if I hold on to it. The moment I let it go and give that person grace, it could be the most outlandish story at all, but it makes me feel better. And so I like to think that these are practices to make your life easier, not to, just make excuses for everyone around you. It's just that it's not your job to be the arbiter of justice for every single person around. And I'm curious for you, when you think of the goal of non-judgment, do you aim to get to a place where you never judge? Or do you accept that judgment is a human thing to do but you just have practices to work through it faster so that it doesn't affect your life as much?
I don't know that there's a big difference between those things. I like the question. I like everything that you said. I've used some of those examples myself about the guy driving ahead of you. And I think in California, nobody uses their turn signal. I think I'm the only one who uses my turn signal. So
my husband says the same thing.
Because I grew up in Chicago.
Yeah, he grew up in Michigan, and I'm like,
yeah.
I feel like I use it, but I guess I don't use it that often because he calls me out.
But I've used the example of what happens when someone changes lanes ahead of you without using their turn signal, and they cut you off a little bit. And I have actually used the example in conversations I've had of the guy's driving his wife who's in labor, and her contractions are 4 minutes apart. And anyway, even if there's no one else in the car, is it possible that you and I ever did what he just did? It's just our natural tendency. And that's why when we are in our default mode of thinking, we're judgmental. We're focused on the past and the future. We're not present. We have a negativity bias. So if we want to think in a different way that will be much more conducive to our own happiness, we need to have a practice. We need to be purposeful. One of my heroes, Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, who I identify as a founder of mindfulness, defines mindfulness as awareness of the present moment on purpose, non-judgmentally. So the idea is to be aware of the present moment. And because that's where happiness lives. If you think of all of your happiest times, it's when you're completely present. You're walking in the forest and you're just enchanted by the light filtering through the canopy of leaves above and just in awe of these majestic redwoods that are so tall and beautiful. And you're feeling that lovely soft sensation of the pine needles under your feet and the scent of the pine needles all around you. And it seems like it's an oxygen-rich environment. It's just so pleasant. You're not thinking about what happened yesterday or the list of things you have to do tomorrow. You're present. And I think all of our really happy, loving moments are when we are present. So back to how Dr. Kabat-Zinn defines mindfulness, it's awareness of the present moment. And this is a definition of happiness. Happiness is awareness of the present moment, but it has to be on purpose. That is, we have to have a practice. We have to have a way of intentionally rerouting our thoughts non-judgmentally. The good news, Melissa, is that our brains have this wonderful quality called neuroplasticity, and we can actually change the way we think. So when we have particular thoughts, they establish a little bit of a pathway in our brains, a little bit of a neural connection. The more we have that thought, the deeper that connection gets, and the more other neurons are sort of joining the party. So we can use that to our advantage. Instead of rehashing our old thoughts of ungratefulness, resistance, judgment, sort of the opposite of the gain essentials, instead of continually deepening the wiring of our brain with those thoughts, we can actually choose different thoughts. But we have to do it purposefully. We have to have a practice. And I think that really ideally should be a daily practice. And my practice is 5 to 10 minutes every morning. What I teach is really something you can do in as little as 3 minutes. And when you practice having these new thoughts, including non-judgment, you do it a little bit every day, then you start to recognize when you're judging. That's when that little light bulb goes off and it says, hey, Melissa, you're judging that driver. And when you see that, you feel that light bulb go off, you become aware of it, you can have a little laugh at yourself because you realize how silly it is and how it's not beneficial for you to be having that thought. And you can reroute that thought. So in the book, I tell a story. I'm very fortunate. I live on Stanford campus and I work at the medical center on Stanford campus. I ride my bike to work. So every day I ride through this beautiful path on part of my trip to the Children's Hospital. And it has a beautiful lining of trees on both sides. And there's a beautiful canopy of leaves overhead. And often the sun is filtering through, as I described in the forest. And it's beautiful, and I'm riding my bike, and I see somebody ahead of me who's walking in the same direction that I'm riding. And as I get closer, I see they have buds in their ears, like I do now. And then as I get closer, I see they're staring at their screen, and I start to form judgments. I think this person is really not aware of the present moment. We're in this beautiful environment, and they're looking at their screen. And then as I get closer, a light bulb goes off. And I recognize that I'm judging this person. I don't know them. Maybe they're like a nature freak. And, there's a podcast they're listening to that's, really uplifting them. Doesn't matter. So a light bulb goes off. I recognize that I'm being judgmental of this person. And I laugh to myself and I drop the judgment. And as I ride by them, I look at the person and I smile and I say, good morning. And they look at me and smile and say, good morning. And it was a pleasant interaction. It went from being a negative interaction where I might have had these negative thoughts and frowned as I passed the person and they would have said, what the heck? That turned into a pleasant interaction just because a light bulb went off and I rerouted my thoughts on purpose. So it's these little things that happen frequently during our day that are examples of how we can actually rewire our brains toward a happier state.
It reminds me of when I first started my mindfulness journey. I remember reading something and having some light bulb moments, of course, but then sort of putting it into practice. I was in college at the time, so it was kind of a touch in high school, a touch in college, but nobody was really going down that road with me, so I didn't have people to throw things around with. And I remember just thinking, it just feels fake. This is not how life really is. And I think now, looking back, it was true for me because that's not how my life was, because I was stuck in that default pattern of thinking and I had never really challenged it. And so I didn't see a way out. And it felt fake because it wasn't something I was used to at all. It's like when you go to the gym for the first time or you try a new sport for the first time and you're terrible at it. And you're like, well, I'm not a football player or I'm not a runner. And it's like, well, nobody's a runner the first time they run, but the moment you make that decision, then you kind of are a runner. And so you have to build up that muscle. And in the same way, I think about posture. So I do yoga a lot and I'm always kind of checking myself to stand up straighter. And now people comment on my posture often. I like how you just sort of sat up a little bit. It's a reminder. And
I'm sure everyone listening did the same thing.
Yeah, I got to put your shoulders back. And I'm there more often, but I still catch myself slouching. It's just less often. And I don't beat myself up like I used to, where it's like, God, you're just so bad at sitting. So I need, you're never going to do this. And then you kind of notice progress. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I just have to remind myself. And so in the same way, that neuroplasticity, it's like your default pattern of thinking, thoughts are habits. And if you've been allowing yourself to just be default and you haven't been bringing awareness to it, then it's going to be created, those grooves are going to be created by the negativity bias. But the moment that you choose to start efforting a little bit to make a conscious decision, bring intention to it, yeah, it might feel hard at first, but then it sort of becomes second nature. You might feel those judgments, but that trigger in your mind to step back and choose to look at it a different way becomes faster and faster.
That's beautiful. Exactly. I like the analogy between exercising, whether it's going to the gym or jogging or cycling, and our thoughts. When we're new at it, it's a bit awkward. It takes more effort. But as you exercise those muscles or those neurons, insert word here, muscle or neuron, the more you exercise, the more deeply ingrained that particular activity becomes, the more your body or your mind make adjustments to accommodate that practice, as long as you're purposeful about it. And I think that just like with physical fitness, nutrition, and sleep, our physical ingredients for physical well-being, we need to take the same purposeful path when it comes to our minds, our brains, because our bodies and our brains determine our happiness. If our bodies are very overweight and flabby, very unconditioned, full of unhealthy food, we're going to be very distracted by our bodies. It's going to be harder to be truly happy and present. And the same with the way that we use our brains. And the thing is that once you get onto a practice and you're deliberate, purposeful about it, it's actually fun. And the name of my first book starts with Gain Without Pain. And the GAIN is the acronym for gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. And without pain is important, not only because I'm an anesthesiologist and I prevent and treat pain, but the practice doesn't have to be painful. You don't have to sit and meditate for half an hour without moving a muscle and without having a thought in your head. I'm going to give you a 3-minute practice where you focus your thoughts. And it's easy and it's fun. And the same thing about taking care of your body. Once you kind of get into the practice of eating a certain way, exercising regularly, start slow and paying attention to your sleep hygiene, and then getting much better night's sleep and feeling better during the day. These are all ingredients that will make us happier and more fulfilled. Why don't a lot of people do these things already? And I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but my feeling is that we think we don't deserve it. Maybe we think we don't deserve to be happy. And this is why we resist things that make us happy. We're just in our daily life. Something happens, it gives us a little joy. It's the smile at that person we ride past. It's the thumbs up to the person that wants to change lanes ahead of you and you give them permission and you feel good. You get a little hit of dopamine. So why don't we always behave that way? Why don't we always smile at that person we're going past? Why don't we always act in a way that's courteous when we're driving or just interacting with other people in general? I think the reason is that we feel like we don't deserve to be happy. So again, I'm not a mental health professional, but that's just my idea. It doesn't matter what the reason is. It's just intuitively, empirically important to change these negative ways of being, both mental, spiritual, and physical.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I also have the belief that the energy that you're in is the energy that you create more of. And so before that choice, you see the world through a lens of that emotion that you're holding. And one example that is just coming to mind, it's something that's just sort of funny that happened in my house. My husband had this super stressful thing coming up. I was trying to help out. I knew he wasn't going to have time to eat unless I had food for him. So I went and got a burrito and I gave him this burrito and he texts me, and mind you, a couple of things had gone wrong. And now I'm even looking at that through the lens of, did those things go wrong, or was it all that stress that you were holding and you saw it as the things going wrong? But he texts me and he's like, I can't eat this burrito. The bacon tastes like rubber or something like that. And I was like, I was just like, okay. And I was just kind of staying out of it, letting him do his thing, waited till after his stressful thing. Then he felt really good. And then he went back to the burrito and he's like, I don't know, this tastes fine now. And I'm like, oh, that's just so true. So often, which is why like when I'm in a super negative mood, I go out and I'm just irritated by all the things that are happening. And so being reminded of that, it's like you have to interrupt that default patterning. And that's a choice. Like you can't just sit there and wait for something really good to happen because it might even be happening and you just don't have the ability to see it because of the energy that you're holding. And so I love that the idea of the human connection, because I feel like that snaps me out of it so quickly. Like I tend to, when I'm in those moods, it's just like everything kind of bugs me. I feel like I have like porcupine bristles on and it's like, just don't come near me. Like, oh God, you bumped into me versus like, oh, hey. And so what I do is I'll just stop and kind of smile at somebody. And usually when I just make that eye contact, I'm reminded that I'm like not alone here in the world. And I think the reason that that's so powerful is it's like somebody else's emotion, somebody else's happiness can be the thing that maybe rubs off on me, even if my smile is sort of fake at that time. But I find that the hard part about judgment for me is that the moment I'm feeling it is the moment that I kind of attach to that emotion. It's like, oh my gosh, this, and this is less than. And so it is really helpful for me to have a structure to go to, because in that moment, without the structure, without a practice, then it's like, I just am supposed to not feel this way, versus like, okay, I know the steps. I do this, and then I do this, and then I do this, and then I check in. How do I feel? So I would love for you to share the 3-minute practice that sort of helps you snap out of those default patterns. I would love for you to share the 3-minute practice that sort of helps you snap out of those default patterns.
I love everything you just said, Melissa. And I think since we're talking about judgment and being non-judgmental, being judgmental is seeing the object of our judgment, the world, through a lens that is colored. And it's often not colored with rose color. It's colored with some negativity color. So we tend to see things negatively unless we make an effort to change what we think. That's just the way we're built. So when we see things through a lens of negativity, we're not seeing things as they truly are. When we look at another person through that lens of negativity, we're not seeing that person for who they are. So we need to ask ourselves the question, do we want to see the world as it is? Or do we want to see the world in this subjective, mostly negative way? And I think when we pose that question to ourselves, we all decide we want to see things as they are. And that smile to that person that you're walking past is just a little touch of that. You're sending a signal, we're both human beings, we are who we are, and it's just a little bit pleasurable to connect with that person. You're in some way, you're notifying them that you're human and they're human and we're connected. And you get a little dopamine hit from that. So let's pay attention to that dopamine hit and try to get more of that. So that brings us to the game practice. So I can describe it to you in 3 minutes or less. So what we do is, I think it's important to do this first thing in the morning because it sets the tone for your day. So we wake up, we open the blinds. I think that seeing natural light is important. We do our morning hygiene thing and we find a comfortable place to sit. Could be in a chair, on a pillow, on the floor, however we like to position our body for 3 or 4 minutes. We close our eyes and we focus on our breath, like in any kind of meditation or most forms of meditation. The breath is central. The breath is always there. It's always accessible. So if we can link a way of thinking and being to our breath, we can always come back to it anytime we're feeling tense or judgmental. So we focus on the breath, and I think it's important to slow it down. So people talk about a ratio of the in-breath, pause, and out-breath being important. I think it's mainly important just to slow the breath down. So we maybe take a breath in through our nose to a count of 3, pause to a count of 3, and let the breath go to a count of 3. And we slow the breath down. And this actually causes our heart rate to slow down, causes our blood pressure to go down, causes a decrease in the amount of adrenaline flowing through our body. So we slow down our breath, our eyes are closed, we focus on our breath, we slow it down, we count the in-breath, the pause, and the effortless exhalation. And then we begin to focus our thoughts on that for which we're grateful. So G in GAIN is gratitude. I'm grateful for this breath. It beats the alternative of not having this breath. I'm grateful for having this comfortable place to sit this morning. I'm grateful for, and then we can think about a loved one and then another loved one. In my case, I often think of my work. I'm privileged to do what I do. I love taking care of children and their families. I love making their day just a little bit brighter by being present with them. This is something for which I'm grateful. I'm grateful for my relative health and wealth. Not that we're all wealthy or even perfectly healthy, but we could be less enriched, both physically and financially. So I'm grateful for all these things. I'm grateful to have a safe place to be. And then we transition to thoughts of acceptance. And this is an acknowledgement that there is pain in life. There is joy and there is pain. And trying to push the pain away is resisting it. And there's a formula in the book, which is suffering equals pain times resistance. So the pain is there. I lost my son at the age of 29. That pain is not going away. However, if I resist it, if I try really hard not to think about it, or I try to rationalize it, or I try to say it was his fault, or in any other way resist it, my suffering increases. If I lower my resistance, in other words, accept, since I think that resistance is the opposite of acceptance, if I lower my resistance and embrace full acceptance, my suffering will diminish. So I actually take a painful thought, can be my son, that's an easy one, and I actually envision bringing it closer and closer and closer and opening my chest. I envision opening my heart. I envision bringing this pain inside my heart and enveloping it with my heart, embracing it with my heart, fully accepting it so that there's no separation. And if I ask myself the question, can I live with this pain forever? The answer is yes. And then I transition to intention. And one thing we need to be purposeful and intentional about is being present, because our default mode is being very distracted by the past and future in maladaptive ways. So when I get to the I in GAIN of intention, I just allow myself to focus on my senses right now. The sound of that airplane in the distance flying past, the tingling on the bottom of my feet, the sensation on my backside from the chair pushing up against me, the sweet, very subtle smell of the breath. And I notice these things that are happening right now. And sounds easy. It's not that easy. Our brain wants to go somewhere else. But for 5 seconds, we can just focus on what we hear, what we feel, the sensations, our physical sensations. And tomorrow, maybe we can do that for 10 seconds. And I recognize that my intention is also to look at things more positively, to let go of this negativity bias. And then we transition to the N in GAIN, which is non-judgment. And what I do, Melissa, is I actually have a picture of the Earth apparently suspended in space, one of these beautiful NASA images. And I think to myself, the Earth is neither good nor bad. The Earth is just exactly what it is. I see it for what it is. It's a planet. It's neither good nor bad. There's all kinds of stuff going on the surface. But when I look at the Earth, it's neither good nor bad. And it's only logical for me to think of myself in the same way. I am neither good nor bad. I am just exactly the person I am. And then I transition. I am the person I am. And I kind of hang this I amness onto my breath and return to a focus on the breath, slowing it down, breathing in, pausing, exhaling a couple of times. And then I slowly open my eyes. And all of that in real time can take 3 minutes. And what that does is, first of all, I mean, when I do this with other people, if I'm giving a talk or a workshop, it's remarkable how in 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, the whole room is just like vibrating together and everyone is silent when they open their eyes. And this creates a new pattern of thought that we can go back to more and more throughout the day. And the more we return to it, it could be in response to you recognizing that you were very judgmental of that driver, or me judging the person that I'm riding past. The light bulb goes off. The more we return to these gain principles as our way of thinking, the more they become reinforced into our thoughts. And weeks to months, we'll look back and we'll think, gee, I'm actually a little bit happier than I used to be. It's remarkable. It's relatively simple. These are very simple principles that I think are embedded in all philosophies and religions. They're very basic empiric principles. And the practice is fun and makes us happier.
I've found when I focus on gratitude, I feel a difference within days. And part of it's because now I'm training my brain to start looking for the things that I can write down later. And so I will just notice something and like, that's awesome. Whereas it might have just passed me by before. But now I'm like, well, this will give me one of the 10 things to write tonight in my journal, because I like to write 10 things in the morning and the night. But meditation is so powerful. It took me years to really get into it. I was an aspiring meditator for a really long time. Now I have a pretty solid practice of at least 20 minutes a day, but usually I'll add the second 10 to 20 minutes again. But I find that it makes reactivity so much less dominant in my life, I should say. Like, I will just notice that I'm sitting there observing rather than reacting to something. And I didn't even really attempt to change that default pattern. It's just that I get used to, like you say, the more you do this daily practice, the whole point of meditation is sitting there and you're going to have a bunch of thoughts. And the goal, as much as we want to get to this place of no thoughts, I've been there a couple times, but it's rare. Instead, it's like, okay, this thought comes, but I'm not going to get up and make the purchase online or go over there and do something about it. I get used to just sort of letting it float by. And so then I don't even realize how much of an impact it makes on my life until I have a trigger moment of like, oh my gosh, that's something I would have snapped at, or I would have felt fear about, or my heart would have started racing. And instead, I'm just kind of sitting there like, isn't that interesting? and letting the moment float by. But even with a daily practice, we are still human. We still do have these sort of impulse tendencies. When you notice yourself coming into judgment in a moment, how do you apply those same practices in a shorter period of time so that you get there quicker in the moment?
That image of the earth pops up. It's very quick, and sometimes, as you said, you have these thoughts, you just don't grasp them. And you are still present. And that's what I think meditation is in its simplicity, it's the practice of being present. And sometimes the thoughts are okay. Don't judge yourself for having thoughts. And I love the way you describe your detachment from your thoughts. That's really what you're doing. And occasionally we're all going to be judgmental, no matter how committed a practice we have in non-judgment. And that's okay. We got to where we are, this negativity bias, for example, this wariness. I think of early Homo sapiens, 50,000 years ago, cave dwelling, having a fire and trying to protect and feed their families and keep them safe, worrying that there might be a saber-toothed tiger just outside the mouth of their cave, and having to be very wary of that negative thing happening. And that became ingrained in our thoughts, the way we think, over thousands and thousands of years. And it's not going to be something that we get over in a week or a month or a year. But we can really kind of turn the engine around. And instead of moving toward more and more reinforced thought patterns that are deleterious, we can be going in the opposite direction. We can be making progress little by little, baby steps toward being more well-adjusted and happy. And so it's really the process that's important. None of us are there. I think, we have examples of people that we thought maybe were there, maybe they were. I think of Jesus on the cross with his hands and feet nailed to the wooden cross, and back to the suffering equals pain times resistance formula. The pain was certainly there, but I think he was extremely highly evolved in the way he dealt with the pain and accepted it fully. In other words, if suffering equals pain times resistance and the resistance goes to zero, that is, acceptance is complete, the suffering goes to zero, even though the pain is still there. So, yes, I think there have been examples in human history of individuals who have become very highly evolved. But it's a spectrum, it's a bell-shaped curve, as we say in medicine. There's highly evolved, there's very minimally evolved, and then there's the rest of us kind of in the middle. That's okay. If we learn to be less judgmental of ourselves, we won't be self-critical when we judge. You won't judge yourself for that thought that may have been a little hostile or a little selfish or a little this, a little that. You just observe it. You don't have to judge it. You don't have to judge yourself. And so our goal is really the process. And I'm certainly not there. There is no there. It's only the process.
I think that's such an important distinction between pain and suffering, because I view it the same, where, yes, pain's going to happen. We're not going to ascend pain, I suppose. But the suffering, I think, is the choice. The suffering is when we cling to it, our ideas around it, what's caused it, why it's there, what should be happening, what shouldn't be happening, versus just accepting that moment. And then instead, you only have one thing to deal with, the pain, kind of moving through that versus all of the meaning that you give it. So thank you so much for bringing us such an enlightening conversation and really practical, actionable practices to achieve this. So for listeners that are interested in learning more about you and the GAIN method, where's the best place for them to connect and find your books?
They can go to my website, which is greghammermd.com, all lowercase, greghammermd.com. And there is a lot of material there, a lot of media. So hopefully our conversation will be there soon. And there's also a link to the Gain Without Pain book.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/256. Your challenge for this week is to try the GAIN method for just 7 days and see if you feel any different. I always say this, but the key to coming back to a practice over and over again is to be really intentional about noticing the differences that you feel. Otherwise, why are you doing it in the first place? And that noticing takes a whole lot of awareness, so it pops you into the present moment. So remember, it's gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. I've been journaling every morning. I've been sharing that a lot, but what I've been journaling lately are the little things that bug me. Yes, I've been bringing more awareness to them and asking for guidance to see it from a higher perspective. And depending on your beliefs, that guidance either comes from a power greater than you or your own higher state of consciousness, your own higher self. To me, they're one and the same. We are all one. So whether you're viewing it as a God that's outside of you, a man sitting on a cloud, or just the divine matrix that runs through all that is, there's something there. There's something that can lead you, even if it's yourself. So for 7 days, put into practice gratitude. Maybe you start your day journaling with a few things that you're grateful for, or maybe it's in meditation, or even a walking meditation. I find this next step is easier to do when you're focusing on something specific. So, for example, this morning, my husband did something that bugged me. Just a little thing, but you know how little things can feel like big things depending on your emotional state? And yeah, I'm pregnant, so sometimes things feel like big things. But I journaled about it and I wrote how my lower self wanted to respond. I then straight up wrote, let me see this from a higher perspective. And I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I can't change it anyways, it already happened. But I can find full acceptance. And I can try to see things from somebody else's point of view. And I can bring a whole lot of intention around that. Because what do I intend to be in that moment? And that's the next step. How do I want to be remembered? If somebody was broadcasting my energy, what would I want that to feel like? Now, how can I bring that into this situation? And you'll find that even just those 3 steps take you to a place of non-judgment. So what if in that experience you had total and full acceptance, total and full trust that whatever happened is not good or bad or right or wrong, but just how it's supposed to be from a perspective that you may never understand because you're limited by your human form? Now, how do you feel about it? And I know this might take practice, but I promise you that the more you go at it, the easier it is to come to quicker. And just the more that you focus on gratitude in general on a daily basis, you begin to rewire your brain to see everything from a higher perspective. So let me know how it goes. Reach out to me on Instagram at mindlovemelissa or leave a comment right on the show notes page at mindlove.com/256. If you find this episode helpful, please consider sharing it with someone. You can tap that little share button, send it directly to them, or take a screenshot and tag Mind Love Melissa and Mind Love Podcast. If you really love this episode or you find value from the show in general, consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you've already left one on one of the platforms, maybe copy and paste it over to the other. Because that is the key to my heart and you will be my favorite person, and I absolutely love hearing positive feedback from you guys. Plus, you just might hear your review on the show. If you'd like to support Mind Love, the best way to do that is by joining Mind Love Premium at mindlove.com/premium. You get a whole backlog of exclusive episodes only available for premium members, all in a private feed that you can import straight to your favorite podcast player. You only have to do that one time, and then you get ad-free listening experience, early release episodes, and all sorts of bonuses straight to your podcast player. And finally, you can find all of my amazing sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.